Though it was almost exhausting, Himmler seemed to be pleased with himself and his subordinates. The SS camp staff faced a fresh, unprecedented task. Adolf Hitler had ordered the final solution of the Jewish question, which he had promised the nation 10 years before. The Auschwitz camp commander Höss quoted Himmler in his memoirs. "The Führer ordered that it was us, the SS, who were to carry out that order. The places of annihilation in the East cannot cope with campaigns of such scope, and so I have designated Auschwitz to carry it out." Speaking to a conference in Wannsee in Berlin on the 20th January 1942, Reinhard Heydrich told senior Third Reich officials that the right time had come to exterminate the rest of the 11 million Jews from all over Europe, mainly from Poland and the Soviet Union, but also from other countries not yet under German occupation. The Jews were herded into ghettos, degraded by the brutal way they were treated and by their living conditions. Nazi legislation in German-occupied Poland, and also in land incorporated into Germany, had implemented the ideas of the Nuremberg laws from the outset, and the desire of Mein Kampf's author to put paid finally to world Jewry. The Jews were systematically singled out when conquered nations were being pacified, settled in separate districts and towns, marked with the Star of David, had all contacts with the rest of the local population ruptured. Death sentences were passed on all on both sides who tried to break out of that isolation. Hanging and shooting was the penalty for leaving the ghetto, as was every gesture of material solidarity and assistance on the Aryan side of the walls. Every 10th Polish citizen, every 3rd resident of Warsaw was a Jew. 500,000 Jews were herded into the Warsaw Ghetto by the Germans. Hans Frank, the general administrator of German-occupied Poland, a doctor of law promoted to his post by the Nazi administration, told his subordinates, "The Jewish race is to be totally destroyed." The ghettos in Poland, Byelorussia, the Ukraine, and Russia, also in Lithuania, became the final stations on what the Germans called the road to heaven. It led through a hell on earth. In the East, the Nazis acted without scruples and constraint, for this land was to be theirs in any case. In Western Europe, however, appearances has to be kept up. The Theresienstadt town ghetto in Czechoslovakia was an example of pretense and deceit. The intention was to display German humanitarianism and respect for law and order. But German law and order resulted in most of those held in Theresienstadt being transported to Auschwitz. Heinrich Himmler was a cold-blooded, calculating and systematic bureaucrat. He had received an order to eliminate the Jews and tackled it in a scientific manner. Auschwitz was the optimum choice for the center to undertake the final settlement of the Jews. It was near the ghettos and labor camps for Jews in the East. Communication was easy with the rest of the Reich. Industry requiring labor was on the spot, while it was simple to conceal the crematorium chimneys amongst the local factories, mines and foundries. The first experiment with gas was as early as September 1941. 600 Soviet prisoners of war and 250 Poles from the sick room were gassed with Zyklon B in the cellars of Block 11. Auschwitz commander Höss noted that this experiment quietened him down, because, after all, I was on the threshold of mass killing the Jews, and neither I nor Eichmann had any idea how such mass killing should be tackled. Now we had found gas and the manner of procedure, he wrote. This calming of his nerves came before the Wannsee conference. He was fully aware that the Jews would have to be mass murdered sooner or later. Gassing trials continued in 1941 in a building which had been used since 1940 to cremate the corpses of those who had been shot, hung and murdered in other ways. The largest room in this building was the mortuary, converted into a temporary and experimental gas chamber by boring 4 holes in the ceiling through which the gas was introduced. The idea of installing imitation showers came later. The furnaces were installed by a respectable family company, Topf und Sohne of Erfurt. Topf and his sons went on to construct crematoria furnaces in Birkenau and other camps. The gas chamber and crematorium 1 furnaces proved insufficient when the mass transports of Aktion Reinhardt started arriving in Auschwitz in the first months of 1942. The campaign geared to robbing, using and then killing Jews. Further gas chambers called the Red and the White House were installed in 2 buildings from which peasants had been evicted. The corpses were cremated in pits and pyres on the periphery of the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp. It was on Himmler's orders that Auschwitz-Birkenau obtained 4 huge crematoria at the end of 1942, equipped with undressing rooms and gas chambers with imitation showers, where transports arriving at the camp were directed. Very few who entered that gate were ever to find a way out. Adolf Eichmann, a high-ranking SS official and head of the Special Section for Jewish Affairs in the main Reich Security Office, was responsible for organizing this genocide. He did it well. The regular transports of Jews first started arriving at a special platform at the Auschwitz goods station, from where they were dispatched to the camp. In 1944, a siding was constructed immediately inside the Birkenau murder camp. Time was pressing, and there were so many Jews still in Europe. A transport is arriving. The locomotive whistled horribly, it puffed. The train rolled along the station, pale, wrinkled, tired, rumpled, terrified faces of women and men who still had their hair, a rather exotic feature, looked through the barred windows. They passed slowly, observed the station in silence. Then something started to thump and rumble against the wooden wagon walls. Water! Air! The boat snapped free. The wagons were opened. So wrote the author Tadeusz Borowski of the arrival of a transport to be gassed. Johann Paul Kramer, a professor of Münster University and an SS camp doctor in Auschwitz, described what he felt on the 2nd of September 1942. I was present for the first time at a special action at 3 a.m. Dante's hell was laughable when compared with that. 3 days later, Kramer was the doctor responsible for selecting a transport from Holland. He wrote, SS men willingly participated in these actions due to the additional rations they received of 1/5 liter of vodka, 5 cigarettes, 100 grams of sausage and bread. Camp Commander Höss thus described the role of the SS doctor at the ramp. The wagons were emptied one after the other. The Jews had to put aside their luggage and file past the SS doctor, who decided whether they were fit to work, watching as they moved. Those able to work were led to the camp, an average of 25 to 30%, bearing all transports into account. Among Greek Jews, only 15% were able to work, however. Indeed, Dante's hell was nothing compared to this. Rudolf Höss wrote, "The Jews who were to be annihilated were led to the crematoria as calmly as possible, men and women separately." After undressing, they entered the gas chamber, fitted with showers to give the impression of baths. The first to enter were women with children, then men. There were always less of them. The doors were quickly bolted shut. Disinfectors waited nearby and immediately threw Zyklon through the ceiling openings. Nearly 1/3 died immediately. Others began to panic, shriek, and try to breathe. After a few minutes, they were all prostrate. After 20 minutes, no one moved. The Sonderkommando extracted goat teeth from the corpses. The women had their hair cut off. The ashes were carried by trucks to the Vistula River and there shoveled into the water. It sometimes happened that the gas chambers were full when a transport arrived. In such cases, the condemned had to wait until there was room for them to be murdered.